So here we have one of the students contacting me about an article I wrote on Medium, which is now back online. And they, claimed it was harassment. It wasn't. It was just me talking about my story. They tend to cling on the harassment thing. Anything that's against them, anything exposing their wrongdoing is harassment. And again, and multiple times, Dean Hall would sort of side with that she wouldn't say that outright, but again, protecting image. But most of these students, that's how they view it. They think anything that's against their worldview is physically damaging them. So absurd. But this particular student contacted my friend from Albany, who was living in Atlanta as a software engineer, claiming that I was veering off the deep end. This is clearly a schizophrenic episode. And when I call her out on it, she admits, she knows she's not crazy. Or she knows I'm not crazy. She knows that I'm sane. She thinks that I'm something worse. I don't know. I guess telling the truth is scarier. And here I told her, I'm like, hey, I don't want you involved. And at the time, I had been given a bunch of opportunities, where they were like, do you want the students expelled? And I was like, no, I want an apology. It's what I really want. I was asked a bunch of times, and I just want this to stop. And I want the school to reform. And this person wouldn't have any of it. But here they are admitting that they knew I wasn't crazy and gaslighting me, defaming me. There are other ones here. So we have a student here responding to the podcast, the re-upload, because they were report bombed the other one, so we had to re-upload it. Claiming there's no Oglethorpe elite, and that student, in third person, was just trying to help you. That student being the reporter. So to give you some backstory I didn't give in the podcast, the student who came to me as a part of the school newspaper, who informed me that he had been bullied by the administration and other students into not covering the story, and being told that, basically having his scholarships threatened. He later completely turned on me. Part of it was he was getting stuff from the school. Part of it was the social circles were really big into hating me. So that was part of it too. That comes up a lot in classroom discussions in which my situation would come up, and it would come up and I wouldn't bring it up, other people would. One of the constant defenses was, well, this gets me friends, and having more people on your side means you're right. And we would be studying like Plato. And I'm like, oh my God, do you guys understand how wrong that is? And the wonderful professor would allow me to have a mouthpiece right there because it both proved the point of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and also, helped me out in a minute. A lot of them were sympathetic to my situation. And they would shirk away. They really did. It was very much groupthink is a large part of the problem. But this student eventually turned on me, and he didn't really have a good lie, but and he perjured himself in court and then lied during a Title IX case. So this student in the third person claims that that he isn't, that he didn't want to be doxxed. And then I eventually cue up to the fact that he's referring to himself in first person after the fact. So if you notice here, I even call him on this. I'm like, wait a minute, did you just come in here pretending to be somebody else? And then it's really you? How's that for honesty? And, then he falls back on the fact that English isn't his first language. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're a journalism student, has to write English. At a paper writing school, that's one of the things. Even our math classes require you to write like 3 or 4 papers, like huge papers, like 10, 20-page papers. It's just known for paper writing. I love it. Most students hate it. And there's a hard rule that you can't do any other language than English unless it's a language class. And I'm like, you can't have a language inability and make that kind of mistake. You're clearly pretending to not be you, and then you forgot. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I deal with a lot. That sort of duplicity. People pretending to be my friend to get information from me. That sort of thing. And there's other things too. Other students have talked about similar situations. Here on a Reddit post about the podcast, another student who was from Oglethorpe talked about, her friend was sexually assaulted at a frat party. It's a more traditional story. She went to the Title IX, and then she was harassed for being a witness, and no one did anything about it. And that sort of harassment happened to her as well. At the end there, someone's like, why do schools deal with this and not the police? This goes back to the topic of the podcast. It's weird legally. There's an old medieval law that, back with Oxford University, one of the oldest universities in the world, I think the oldest university in the world, where an old medieval law was stated that when you were a student, they would turn you over to the university for punishment, not the local lord wouldn't handle the issue. And that's kind of stuck with Western legal tradition. It's not the law on paper, but that is how it's kind of handled, even to this day. And the actual governing regulations are very murky. Very, very murky. There's the Clery Act. There's Title IX's stuff that was added to the bottom of it. But it's very murky, and for the most part, universities do handle their own crime, and if it hurts their image, they sort of sweep it under the rug. Not supposed to anymore. Still happens, and Oglethorpe basically operates like it's fucking 1920. Some of the architecture's from 1920, so I guess it fits. But there you go. So like I mentioned before, part of the problem is with the administration and how they handle issues at all. And there's kind of a feedback loop that happens. The gaslighting didn't come just from the students to the administration, also from the administration to the students. And then from the faculty, the administration, it's sort of a feedback loop that sort of happened. So as a general rule of thumb, the university is trying to protect its image, so they don't want anyone to get in trouble. And because the students are really sheltered, because no one did get in trouble, it gave credence to their version of events. No matter how often I filed police reports or filed complaints, nothing would happen, so I must be wrong. The truth is that they were just burying them all wholesale. I'm not the only victim of this, but because I was a guy, they went above and beyond what they normally do. Again, there's the prejudice from Dean Palder, from her background, but just in general, almost the entire administration is female. Out of the, just thinking about it, besides like financial aid and stuff like that, the only other male is the president. And there's sort of a collective of that. That's sort of a problem. It's actually affected other parts of the university. I've had professors back when things were a bit more above board tell me that they were sort of afraid of the administration because they were guys, they were male professors, and if they had anything to do with Title IX at all, it was their ass, which is exactly why I think my academic advisor suddenly heel-turned against me in the current Title IX, because they really do sort of like drill into the male professors that there's more scrutiny on them, and because they're all female, they sort of group together. Those sorts of group dynamics, that's what happens when there's a majority. And being male at that university makes you a minority, not just amongst the administration, but also even the student body. It's like 60 or 70% female. It creates kind of this problem you wouldn't consider having, but it's sort of human nature, I guess, to be shitty to each other. And it isn't just that white men have been evil throughout history. It's that whoever the majority is evil. That has been white men in power for a long time, but in the Western world, but in other colonized spaces historically and stuff like that. But in any other environment, this is a dynamic that happens, and it just how happens. The environment here is it's a majority female student body and administration, so the oppressed minority here is actually men. I know there's some people are shut the podcast off immediately upon hearing that, but it's true. And there were lots of men on that campus I've spoken to who were like, yeah, I was sexually harassed, and I wouldn't dare talk to anybody because I was already told I'd be kicked out of here so fast if I didn't do what they told me to do. And they're right. That's what happened to me. I mean, I only stayed for as long as I did because I fought really hard and filed the OCR and had enough evidence that OCR started an investigation, which is so rare. You know, I've had to fight this. And then eventually I had to medically withdraw anyway. And they're still throwing everything at me. You know, come the 11th, I may never be able to go to school ever again for the crime of reporting my sexual assault. I just want that to sink in. That's my only crime. My only crime is that I reported my assault. And because I'm a man, because I'm an older man, almost no one will take me seriously. I'm supposed to tough it out, regardless of the adversity. So if I'm on the street without food, I'm not supposed to have support. I'm supposed to just magically have the resources and the physical body and the power of will to pull myself up from the bootstraps and move on. And that's the other part of it too, is I was constantly like, why don't you just leave? Like, this is what I wanted my entire life. Why should I have to leave that? Why should I have to give up my dreams? Why can't I be treated like a human being? Like an equal? Why can't I be listened to? And that prejudice is so pervasive. And the bigotry that goes with it, it's horrifying. It's horrifying that it comes from a university that prides itself on equal rights, on being liberal, on being inclusive. Because it's not. And these people are not enlightened. I mentioned Socrates and Plato and Aristotle earlier. It's kind of old school Oxford. The university requires everyone to go through the core program, and the core program is primarily a philosophy program that teaches traditional liberal arts values. Liberal arts in the academic sense. So a lot of people may not know this, but liberal arts is not liberal in the political term. It's liberal in, it's a translation from, I believe, the Greek. These were the philosophies and knowledge you needed to be a free person. Free man. My last name's Freeman, so it fits. That this wisdom allows you to make educated choices of freedom of thought, of how the world works and how to best organize the world. And those sort of, core philosophies are the classical Greeks, and, other ones are added on, like Augustus and Aquinas. Others. Oglethorpe's great because we add other things to a core program too. I read Toni Morrison. We talked a lot about how Western world isn't so great. I took a class and we read Dogen and meditated. And you have to do this. You have to do this to graduate regardless of what your major is. A lot of people are business majors, practical, having degree people. Science majors, you all have to do it. And for a school that is supposed to represent enlightenment, especially the enlightenment of Socrates, there is very little of the search of truth. And there is a lot of attempting to hide it. Because I wasn't kidding when I said a student murdered someone in a vehicular homicide. And it was buried by people attached to the school. That happened. I posted the AGC article in the podcast. But there was a child who almost drowned in the pool that they used to operate. That was buried. An African American kid was beaten up by a son of a previous Georgia governor, and they buried it and blamed it on him. And the school's attorneys claimed that because the student was black, he was gang affiliated, and clearly he started the fight. Even though he was just jumped by a student who was presenting signs of schizophrenia, and they protected the student, you know. And then that student went on to go shoot a cop and is now doing like 25 to life, like Fulton County. You know, couldn't quite get him out of that one. But I mean, that's part of the tragedy of Oglethorpe, is that what the school represents at its core is broken. It's not a place of enlightenment. It's not a place Socrates would like to be. You know, in essence, I'm facing the same trial that Socrates faced in the Apology. He was accused of corrupting the youth, and his apology is not an apology. His apology is an unrepentant fight for what the truth is, and an accusation to his accusers that he made them look bad because he sought real empirical truth regardless of class and regardless of ignorance. And he refused to abandon that to the end. And that's why Socrates should be remembered. You have to learn that your freshman year at Oglethorpe. And I faced the same thing. I'm accused of corrupting the youth. And my real crime is exposing the truth. And I think I'm going to leave you with that thought. And the hope that my actions may someday in the future fix Oglethorpe and make it the place that it should be. Thank you.